Hello there. I just recently saw a video by a YouTuber by the name of Your Brain on Religion, in which he was responding to Shock of God's challenge to atheists. And he wanted to, or at least claims that he is able to disprove every single religion all at once with one argument on the basis of the afterlife, because he feels that that is an essential uh, ideology to religions, and that every single religion was formed because of the idea of an afterlife. Now, before we get started on this, I obviously feel like that he's made a couple of assumptions that are not accurate in his argument and wanted to point them out and offer some clarification. One of the first is his example of conventional logic, which is around the 2-minute mark in his video. And in it, he uses an example of a person A saying, I have a baseball, and person B saying, oh yeah, well, prove it. And person A presents the baseball that he has to person B. Now, and he says that is conventional logic. Now, that is not conventional logic. That is actually a form of thought called empiricism, which states that I cannot accept anything as knowledge or true until it has been physically shown and presented to me. There are two examples that I can easily give what conventional logic is. The first would be if person A said, I have a mother, and person B said, oh yeah, well, prove it. And person A said, well, I exist. In order for me to exist, there had to have been a man and a woman who came together and had the act of sex and produced me. And a mother is the term that we use for the woman in that act of sex producing a child. Ergo, I have a mother. That would be a better example of conventional logic, where you use experience, but you don't actually have to physically present something in order to make your point. Another example of conventional logic is math itself. Nobody has experienced 50 trillion, and yet we would all agree that 50 trillion plus another 50 trillion equals 100 trillion. And yet, how can that be true if no one has experienced it? How can even trillion be true? And yet, we all accept that that number is real because of conventional logic. If there's a 1, then there could, by adding another 1, you can have 2, and so on and so forth for infinity. But while I will concede to a point that he makes that a lot of religious people will, when challenged on the existence of God, will say, well, you can't disprove God, ergo he must exist. I do admit that is a faulty argument, but the example that he used is not conventional logic, and what I hope to be using here is conventional logic, which would be something that is based on our experience, is not contrary to our experience, and can lead us to either a hypothetical situation that could be or could not be true, but as long as that possibility is open, we have to acknowledge that, as well as showing us something that must be true uh, according to what we know, and as long as our reason and logic don't deceive or fail us and we're honest with ourselves, will lead us to truth. With that out of the way, I do want to start off with his first claim that the afterlife is essential to every single religion out there, that every religion was made uh, because they wanted it, they felt like there had to be an afterlife. Well, unfortunately for Your Brain on Religion, that is not true. The Jewish faith did not, when it was first founded, did not believe in an afterlife. Now, before those of you who are familiar with your scriptures produce Genesis 5:21-24, or the story of Elijah being taken up into heaven, in Genesis 5:21-24, Enoch walked. It says that Enoch walked with God after living a long life. And people would say, well, that shows that the Jewish people believed in an afterlife. Well, while the religious faith was founded, scholars estimate around 1600 BCE with Moses after the Exodus from Egypt, they still did not have an idea of an afterlife. That was not a part of their religion. Their main focus on their religion was the God is God, I am not, I do what God says. And I mean, you can see their whole focus was the law. That was the only important thing to them. And they did not start getting an idea of an afterlife until sometime around the Babylonian exile, which is around 597 BCE. And it was during that time that instead of the religion and stories of the religion being passed down orally, that a lot of the Jewish priests got together and started writing down the Old Testament. A lot of the Old Testaments that occurred before the Babylonian exile were written down and compiled during the Babylonian exile, so that way then the Jewish people would still be aware of their religious truths and not be integrated into the Babylonian cultures and tradition. Also, if you look at the book of Job, which takes place before the Babylonian exile, Job has no, he obviously believes that there is a God, but he doesn't believe that there is an afterlife. He feels like that this is it, that, if you read his responses, it's all, well, this is what God has done, and I've just got to accept it. I mean, he makes no reference to God will reward me in the afterlife for the injustice that I am receiving. He just says, this is the way things are. I've got to accept it as much as it sucks. Now, kind of continuing on that point, he also makes the comment that there is no logical proof for the existence of an afterlife. I would recommend Plato's Phaedo, in which Socrates is giving a final lesson to his students before he accepts the death penalty. And in it, he starts talking about the soul. Now, before any of you start getting after me, the Greek term for soul would be equivalent to life force, not the Christian understanding of soul. It is the life force of an individual. Animals have a soul. Plants have a soul. They are different life degrees of life energy or life force that the Greeks termed the soul. So just for ease, I will be referring to the life force as soul, but I'm not referring to the Christian idea of the soul. I'm simply referring to the Greek philosophical idea of life force. Now, for Socrates, the life force or soul of the individual left the body after death, because death is the opposite of life, obviously, but an opposite cannot destroy each other, and it cannot exist in the same area at the same time as its opposite. That's essentially the law of non-contradiction. And so what happens to the life force of the body after death? Because, I mean, death doesn't destroy it, it's merely the absence of life, so where does that life go? And the energy doesn't just disappear, or at least that's the claim of a possibility that Socrates makes. It doesn't disappear, it continues on. He continues on into making the argument that thus we have reincarnation, but you wanted an argument about how could it be possible for there to be an existence after this one, an afterlife. Well, if it is true that our life force leaves us after death, our soul leaves us after death, and death is merely just the absence of that soul, where is that soul? Because it can't be destroyed by death, it just merely moves elsewhere. It doesn't dissipate, it doesn't disappear, it's life. It can't. If it disappeared, it then became death, which is a contradiction. It then became its opposite, which is impossible for it to do. There is a possibility or a possible explanation for an afterlife, or the possibility of an afterlife. And at around the 3-minute mark in the video, he raises up a question about the consciousness of the individual and how it can exist in the afterlife. And before he gets into that, he very appropriately does defines what he means by consciousness, and he uses a dictionary definition, which is an awareness of oneself and one's surroundings, which I will admit is a very good definition of consciousness. It is a awareness not only of oneself, but the surroundings of others. And then he continues on to say that for us, we get our awareness or our consciousness, from our sense experiences. Now, that seems to me, while it does have some accuracy, is too general. And what I mean by that is, while it is true that in order to start off with our self-awareness, with our consciousness, we do need to have some sense experience. We can't know there's an I until we experience other. Now, what about someone who was born healthy, had all of their senses, and then because of some accident lost their senses? They no longer have any of their single senses. They still have their consciousness, they just don't have their senses. So it seems to me that senses are not intricately tied to consciousness or self-awareness. The other issue that I have is, what about when we dream? We still have our consciousness, we still have our self-awareness, we still have the awareness of self and other, but there's no sense experience whatsoever. It's all just something that's produced by the mind. There's no actual experience. It's all just an illusion. And so it seems to me that he's made too broad of a generalization. He's equivocated sense experience with consciousness. And at no point in the definition does it say that self-awareness and or sense experience and consciousness are one and the same. For example, could it not be possible that there are beings who experience differently than we do? Now, we know for a fact that other animals have sense experiences that are different than we are, and since it is possible for different experiences, different interpretations of, or different perceptions of reality, why could it not be possible that there is a being or group of beings who have awareness but not through sense experience? They have consciousness, but they have almost a direct awareness of themselves and others, not through sense experience. Could that not be a possibility? I understand that this is hypothetical and I don't have any physical proof for it, but Your Brain on Religion made the claim that there is no possibility other than what he has just stated, and I have hopefully presented a valid possibility of there existing a group of beings who have experience, or who have awareness, consciousness, and don't have sense experience, but they do have that awareness of self and others. This type of argument that I'm currently presenting is very similar to the argument about the existence of aliens. There are multiple theories about whether or not an alien exists, and different positions, and we still have to be open to the possibility of aliens existing, even though there's no proof for the existence of them, but there's also no proof for the non-existence of aliens. Since there is no proof either way, we have to be open to the possibility of the existence of aliens. Now, I will admit that I cannot prove the possibility of the hypothetical beings that I have presented, but you also can't disprove them. And since they can't be proven one way or another, but it is still possible that they exist with the definition that has been presented by Your Brain on Religion, then why couldn't then he still has to account for that possibility. He has to be able to show that that possibility is absolutely entirely false and impossible, which he failed to account for and failed to do so. And it's difficult for me to see why the hypothetical beings that I presented would be utterly and necessarily false based on what we know. And at around the 4-minute mark, he then uses a computer example, that we are nothing more than computers. Now, I would disagree with him right there, because a computer is not alive. We are. We have that soul. We have that life force. Now, before you say that electricity is the life force of the computer, it's merely the uh, catalyst that helps drive the computer forward to help it do what it does. I mean, as Your Brain on Religion says, we have electricity in our bodies as well, which is helped produced by glucose or sugar. But there's something else. There's a life force, a life energy that we have that a computer does not, that a rock does not. Um, a computer is simply just a machine. It's not alive. We are. And so and since the whole question is on life after death, this seems to me to be a very unusual analogy to use. It would seem better to me to use an analogy of something that is alive. But we'll continue on with this analogy. The second issue that I have is he poses the question that, so you have the processor, you have the electricity, you have the different software, which would be the equivalent to our senses. And he poses the question that if you remove something from the computer, have you not just destroyed the entire functionality of the computer? So therefore, it must be impossible for us to have a consciousness without sense experience. And that sense experience, or that we need the whole package, so to speak, in order for that to be the full human being. My response to that is, what if you just removed the monitor? You still have left intact the main processing power, the same, so to speak, the brain, if we want to continue this analogy. We've left the brain of the computer intact, so the brain still operates and still does what it's doing. We just can't see what it is doing, but the brain is still, or the computer is still working the way it's supposed to. And like I said earlier, that's, you have people who lose their senses all the time. So what if you had someone who lost every single one of their senses, and wouldn't they still have awareness? Wouldn't they still have self-consciousness? So it seems to me that this is just a poor analogy. It needs to be better worked on, and it doesn't do justice to his claim, and it doesn't fulfill what he's trying to do. It just doesn't work. It doesn't show that we are reliant on our senses for our awareness. Like I said, I will admit that we need our senses in order to start our awareness, but once it's started, it's possible to lose them but still retain our awareness. Secondly, he talks about, and if you remove the plug, does the computer then go to an afterlife? Well, like I said, the computer doesn't have a life force. We do. So that particular aspect of the analogy just doesn't seem to make sense to me. Like I said, the life force is that which moves on. The computer, since it doesn't have a life force, doesn't continue on. Now, if you wanted to say the electricity was the life force of the computer, the electricity is still there. It's just no longer being provided to the computer. So even there, if you want to make that stretch, it still doesn't seem to me to disprove the possibility of the existence of an afterlife. And finally, to kind of go back to, if he is correct that we are reliant on our sense experiences in order to have our awareness, our self-consciousness, that if we lose our senses, our bodily senses, then we lose our consciousnesses, then it seems to me that religion also has an answer for that. And I know that this isn't like an empirical, scientific, or however you want to put it. This is just me presenting a religious belief to you, but it doesn't contradict with the science. The possibility of this does not contradict science. The Jewish faith, Christianity, and Islam all talk about a bodily resurrection, and Christianity even talks about a new heaven and a new earth. And the Jewish faith also believes in that. If you look at their portrayals of paradise, it talks about the lion sleeping with the sheep. Everything is a vegetarian, and the reason for that is being, according to their traditions, in the creation account of Genesis, Adam and Eve and all the animals were vegetarians, And then because of the fall that Adam and Eve committed, it messed with the entirety of nature, so everything became carnivorous, or things became carnivorous. But and so throughout all of salvation history, as the Jewish and Christian faith put it, God is trying to bring us back to that natural, original state that nature was in, and part of that is, the new heaven, the new earth, the way things were meant to be. And so, how will this work? I don't know. Will it work literally the way that it's described in the Bible? I don't know. I'm not saying it does, and I'm not saying it doesn't. All I'm saying is that religion does have an answer for the issues that your brain on religion raises about our reliance on the bodily senses for our self-awareness in the afterlife. These three religions all claim that there is a bodily resurrection. And I'm not sure about the Muslim faith, so I can't speak on it, but the Christian and Jewish faith do believe in a new heaven and a new earth. Whether that's literal or metaphorical, that's kind of up for debate. But again, they answer the problem that he raised about the consciousness and sense experience being intricately tied together, which, again, like I said, I don't think is the case, but if it is, religion has a solution to that problem. Now, would the resurrection of a body be theoretically possible? I would say yes, if there is a God, which if there's an afterlife, there has to be a God, would be my personal thing on it. So if you're willing to bear with me on this assumption that there is a God, would it not be possible for him, if he created, as kind of stated in Genesis, Adam from the dust of the earth, and science is in perfect agreement with it, that every single atom, or however you want to put it, that we are created or made from comes from the earth, then it would seem to me that it would be possible for God to recreate a new body for us from the dust of the earth and reinsert the life force that left the old body and reinsert that soul into the new body. Again, that's just a possibility. It is not in direct contradiction to what science has or knows at this point in time. It's just a possibility. So while I do admire your brain on religion's attempt to disprove all religions with one argument, I feel like he failed on two accounts. The first account is he did not properly understand what the different religions taught about the afterlife. I believe I mentioned earlier, and if I didn't, I'll go ahead and mention it now, that the afterlife is not an essential aspect to either Judaism or Christianity. If you actually look at the teachings of the Jewish faith and the Christian faith as well, again, I don't know a lot about Islam, so I can't say much for them, but the Jewish and Christian faith, the afterlife isn't the primary motive. It's doing what God wants, because he is God and we are not. That's should be, as well as because it is the right thing to do. Those are the primary motives. The afterlife is merely a bonus, so to speak. The reason being is the Catholic Church has stated, if you are doing things for selfish reasons, it's a selfish act. So if you are doing an act of charity for a selfish reason, it's not an act of charity, it is a selfish act. And if you are doing good acts, that way then you can get into heaven, that's a selfish act. So selfish acts aren't going to get you into heaven. That's the claim of Christianity and Judaism. Now, it is true that a lot of people will spread a different message, but that's not the claim that religion actually makes. Now, the other issue that I have, or the other area that I feel like he, as to why this wasn't the best argument that he could have made, he completely ignored God. If you're going to, and that seems unusual, if you're going to argue against all religions, both past, present, and future, it seems to me that you need to disprove the very thing that they worship, the existence of a God. I would recommend reading Thomas Aquinas's On Being and Essence, which is a work that is not well known, but it is a philosophical work. He doesn't use religion except for a couple of the quotes from the founding fathers who made philosophical quotes at the very end of the book. And he starts off by saying, well, what do we know about our existence in cause and effect? Now, it is not a prime mover argument or any of the 5 ways arguments that are so often posted about, but it is looking at, is there a possibility for there to be a supreme being to exist? And the crux of the matter is that the only being that could exist in that way is a being that is pure existence. So if you want to disprove all religions, I would recommend trying to disprove the existence of a being that is pure existence. Only in that way can you disprove all religions at once, in my opinion. So I would recommend reading that and then trying to disprove it. Now, I realize that this video has not proven beyond a shadow of a doubt for the existence of an afterlife, but Your Brain on Religion stated that it is not, from his proof, it is impossible, not even a 0.000000001% chance of an afterlife. It is impossible. I feel like that in this video that I have said, I have at least put in that 0.0000001% chance. I actually feel like the percentage is higher, but I'm willing to acknowledge that it's still just a possibility and not definitive proof. I will be the first to admit that. But because there's that possibility, he hasn't disproven all religions once and for all beyond a shadow of a doubt, which is his claim and what he tried to do. So hopefully the rest of you see what I felt like I saw and what I felt like were inconsistencies, and I hope this video helped you out. I might do more of these in the future. I'm not sure. This is kind of a test, but I thought it was fun, so maybe I'll do this again.